The leather folder was sitting right in front of me. My sons were smiling. My daughter-in-law was holding a glass of wine. Everyone around the table looked happy. It was supposed to be my retirement celebration. 40 years of work. 40 years of sacrifice. 40 years building a company from nothing. Then someone touched my shoulder. I turned and saw our bank manager standing behind me. He didn't smile. He didn't congratulate me. He simply slipped a folded note into my hand and quietly walked away. I opened it beneath the table. The message was short. Don't sign anything tonight. My stomach tightened. Then I read the second line. Someone is trying to move your company without your knowledge. I slowly looked up. My sons were still smiling at me. The leather folder was still waiting for my signature, and suddenly the celebration didn't feel like a celebration anymore. It felt like a setup. Let me take you back to how it all started. My name is Robert Hayes. I'm 67 years old. Most people see the finished version of a successful businessman. They see the offices, the equipment, the contracts, the employees. What they don't see are the years behind it, the years sleeping in my truck because I couldn't afford a motel, the years eating sandwiches in construction trailers because every dollar mattered, the years working through rainstorms, injuries, and exhaustion because quitting wasn't an option. I started Hayes Construction when I was 27. I had almost nothing. But I had determination, and I had a wife who believed in me. When the company finally began growing, she stood beside me every step of the way. Then cancer took her. It happened 12 years before everything fell apart. Losing her was the worst day of my life. For months I barely functioned. The only thing that kept me moving was my family, especially my two sons. I told myself that everything I built would someday belong to them. That thought became my purpose. I worked harder than ever, not for myself, for them. When my older son Ethan joined the company, I was proud. I taught him everything I knew. I brought him into meetings, introduced him to clients, trusted him with responsibilities that had taken me years to earn. A few years later, my younger son Luke joined too. I did the same for him. Watching them learn the business felt like watching my future take shape. For a long time, I believed everything was going according to plan. Then small things started happening. At first, they didn't seem important. One morning, I arrived for our weekly executive meeting. The conference room was empty. I checked my watch. I wasn't late. I checked my calendar. The meeting was scheduled exactly when it always was. I asked my assistant where everyone was. She looked uncomfortable. They already had the meeting. I frowned. What do you mean they already had it? It was moved earlier. No one told me. She shifted nervously. I thought they had. Later that afternoon, I asked Ethan about it. He laughed. Come on, Dad, it was just routine stuff. I stared at him. Routine stuff still used to involve me. He smiled and put a hand on my shoulder. We're trying to make things easier for you. I nodded. But something about his answer didn't sit right with me. A few weeks later, it happened again. Another meeting, another schedule change, another explanation, then another and another. Soon I realized it wasn't accidental. Important discussions were taking place without me. Major decisions were already finalized before I even heard about them. Whenever I asked questions, everyone suddenly had a reason. A new system, a scheduling issue, a misunderstanding. Individually, the excuses sounded reasonable. Together, they formed a pattern. And that pattern made me uncomfortable. Around the same time, retirement became a frequent topic. Not from me, from them. At family dinners, Luke constantly talked about how much I deserved a break. Ethan joked about buying me a fishing boat. My daughter-in-law, Vanessa, sent me articles about retirement communities and luxury travel packages. At first, I thought they were being thoughtful. Then I realized something strange. I had never said I wanted to retire. Not once. Yet everyone seemed obsessed with the idea. One evening, we were having dinner together. Luke took a sip of water and smiled. You know, Dad, most people your age are retired already. I laughed. Most people didn't spend 40 years building this company. Vanessa smiled politely. You've earned the right to relax. I looked around the table. Nobody said anything. But for a moment it felt like everyone was waiting for a different answer. The conversation moved on. I tried to forget about it, but I couldn't. The pressure continued, week after week, month after month. Then financial information started becoming difficult to access. That was new. Very new. For decades, I could request any report and receive it within hours. Suddenly, things were different. One afternoon, I asked Vanessa for updated financial statements. She smiled. I'll clean them up first. I frowned. Clean them up? Some of the accounting structures are complicated now. I stared at her. I've reviewed company finances longer than you've been alive. She laughed awkwardly. Exactly. Things are changing. The conversation lasted less than a minute, yet it stayed with me all day, because it wasn't what she said, it was how she said it. Like I was being managed. Like information was being filtered before reaching me. The feeling bothered me, but I still didn't think my family was betraying me. I simply thought they were becoming overprotective. That was easier to believe. Months passed. The company continued growing. Revenue increased. Projects expanded. Everything looked successful from the outside. Yet somehow I felt more disconnected than ever. Employees stopped speaking freely around me. Conversations ended when I entered rooms. Managers suddenly became careful with their words. The atmosphere had changed. I just didn't know why. Then came the moment that embarrassed me more than I wanted to admit. We were holding a leadership presentation for investors and board members. Ethan was leading the event. The presentation focused on the future of the company, expansion plans, leadership development, growth projections. Everything looked impressive. Then a slide appeared showing the company's projected leadership structure 5 years into the future. I stared at the screen. My name wasn't there. Not once. I felt a strange heaviness settle in my chest. A board member raised his hand. What role will Robert have during this transition? The room became quiet. Ethan smiled. Dad built the foundation. A few people nodded. Then he added, but the company needs modern leadership moving forward. Polite laughter spread through the room. I forced myself to smile. Inside, I felt humiliated. 40 years. 40 years of sacrifice. And somehow I had become the old man standing in the corner while everyone discussed the future without him. After the presentation ended, several people approached Ethan to congratulate him. Hardly anyone approached me. I stood there holding a cup of coffee, smiling politely, pretending everything was fine. That night I stayed in my office long after everyone left. The building became quiet. The lights in the parking lot reflected through my window. I sat there thinking about that presentation. Thinking about the missing meetings, the retirement conversations, the filtered reports, the strange looks from employees. Individually, none of those things proved anything. Together, they felt different. For the first time, I began wondering whether I was losing control of my own company. I hated that thought. Not because of the business, because of what it implied. If I was losing control, somebody else was gaining it, and the people closest to me seemed to be standing right in the middle of it. I still wasn't ready to believe my sons would betray me. But for the first time in my life, doubt had entered the room. And once doubt enters, it rarely leaves quietly. The real turning point came about 3 weeks later. One of our oldest clients called me directly. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was what he said. Robert, I wanted to personally thank you for approving the transfer. I frowned. What transfer? There was a pause. The contract transfer. I sat up straighter. What contract transfer? The client became quiet. Then he sounded confused. You approved moving the project under the new company. My stomach tightened. What new company? The silence on the other end told me everything. The client genuinely believed I already knew. After we ended the call, I immediately requested copies of the paperwork. Nothing arrived. I requested them again. Still nothing. By the third request, people were avoiding me. That was the moment I stopped trusting explanations. The next morning, I began reviewing archived company records myself. Hours later, I found a company name I had never seen before. The name appeared repeatedly. Large contracts were attached to it. Major financial transactions were attached to it. Yet nobody had ever mentioned it to me. I checked the registration records. The company had been created almost a year earlier. My hands became cold. A year. That meant whatever was happening had been planned for a very long time. The following day, I hired a forensic accountant. I told nobody. Not my sons. Not my daughter-in-law. Not a single executive. I wanted facts. Nothing else. 2 weeks later, the accountant walked into my office carrying a thick folder. His expression told me the news wasn't good. He closed the door behind him. Then he placed the folder on my desk. "Mr. Hayes," he said quietly, "you need to prepare yourself." For the next hour, he showed me document after document, bank transfers, ownership changes, contract movements, hidden agreements. The deeper we looked, the worse it became. Millions of dollars had been moved. Clients had been shifted, authority had been redirected, and every trail led back to the same people. My sons, my daughter-in-law, several executives. I remember sitting alone after he left. The office was dark-exy. I had spent their entire lives helping them, and they had spent the last year planning my removal. The second report arrived 4 days later. It was worse, much worse. The accountant had uncovered internal emails, private communications, planning, documents. One message discussed the best timing for my retirement announcement. Another discussed how quickly voting rights could be reassigned. One email included a sentence I still remember. "Once he signs, the transition will be complete." Not retirement. Transition. To them, I wasn't a father, I was an obstacle. Suddenly, every strange moment from the previous year made sense. The missing meetings, the jokes about my age, the financial secrecy, the retirement conversations. They weren't preparing me for retirement. They were preparing me for surrender. Then the retirement celebration arrived. More than 100 guests attended. Board members, clients, employees, friends, family. The room was filled with smiles. People gave speeches. Stories were shared. Glasses were raised. Anyone watching would have believed it was a beautiful family celebration. I almost wished they were right. Then the bank manager slipped me that note, and every doubt disappeared. A few minutes later, Ethan stood. "Dad, before we finish tonight, we have one final surprise." People applauded. Luke slid the leather folder across the table. "Just retirement paperwork." I opened it. The first pages looked harmless, then I kept reading. Share transfer authority, voting, reassignment, executive succession approval, ownership, transfer. The room suddenly felt smaller. If I signed those papers, I would lose control of the company immediately. Not next year, not next month. That night, I slowly closed the folder. The applause faded. People looked confused. My older son smiled nervously. "Dad?" I stood up. The room became quiet. Then, I picked up a remote control, the projector. Behind me came to life, confused. Faces turned toward the screen. The first slide appeared bank transfers. The second slide showed hidden entities. The third displayed ownership records. The fourth showed contract movements. The room became silent. Looked at my sons. Neither would look at me. My daughter-in-law looked frozen. Spoke calmly. No anger, no shouting, no insults, just facts. Explained every transfer, every hidden company, every altered document, every attempt to move authority away from me. Then I revealed the forensic report. 12 months of planning. Millions of dollars redirected. A coordinated effort to remove me from control. Gasps spread across the room. Several board members looked shocked. One executive looked like he might pass out. Then I displayed the final document, the succession plan. The plan that would have taken effect the moment I signed. The room erupted with whispers. Everything was finally exposed. My older son stood up. Dad, please, let us explain. For a moment I looked at him. I remembered teaching him how to read blueprints, remembered coaching his baseball team. I remembered helping him buy his first house. Then I looked back at the evidence. No. The room became completely silent. There was nothing left to explain. Before the dinner even started, my attorneys had already filed emergency injunctions. The evidence had already been submitted. The legal process was already moving forward. The trap they built for me had become their own. Within days, both of my sons were removed from executive leadership. Daughter-in-law became the subject of fraud investigations. Several executives lost their positions. The hidden company structure collapsed. Clients returned. Employees started speaking openly again. The truth spread quickly. For months, lawyers worked through the evidence. I focused on rebuilding. The hardest part wasn't losing trust in business partners. It was accepting what my own family had done. That wound took longer to heal. But I refused to let bitterness control the rest of my life. 1 year later, we gathered again, this time at company headquarters. Hundreds of employees filled the room. I walked onto the stage, carrying another folder. Everyone became quiet. I announced a leadership trust. No family member would automatically inherit authority. Future leaders would earn it through character, loyalty, and performance, not entitlement, not manipulation, not greed. Then I announced a scholarship program for young construction apprentices. The room exploded with applause. For the first time in years, I felt hopeful about the future. Near the back of the room, I saw my son standing quietly. No authority, no control, no special treatment, only consequences. Opened the folder, signed the final document, and smiled, because this time I knew exactly what every page meant. The crowd rose to its feet. The applause seemed to last forever. In that moment, I realized something important. My sons tried to take my company, but what they really wanted was authority they had never earned. And in trying to steal it, they lost the right to ever have it. They believed my age made me weak. What they learned was that experience sees betrayal long before greed sees consequences. 1 year later, I stood on the stage at company headquarters and looked out at hundreds of employees who had helped build the business alongside me. The room was quiet. Many of them knew what had happened. Some had lived through it with me. I opened a folder and placed the final documents on the podium. This company was built on trust, I said, and trust must be earned. Then I announced the creation of a leadership trust that would protect the company long after I was gone. No family member would automatically inherit control. Future leaders would earn their place through character, loyalty, and hard work. The room erupted into applause. For the first time in a long time. I felt at peace. Near the back of the room, my sons stood silently. They no longer had authority, voting power, or control over the company they had tried to take. They had spent a year planning how to remove me. In the end, they removed themselves. I signed the documents and handed them to the board chairman. The applause grew louder. At that moment, I realized something important. Money can be stolen. Positions can be taken. Even trust can be broken, but authority, built through decades of sacrifice, cannot be taken by greed. My sons thought age had made me weak. What they learned was that experience sees betrayal long before greed sees consequences.